Hi, I'm Mireille. They said I was too quiet, too dramatic, too forgettable, but somehow they still remembered to wear my bracelet, to show my paintings, to use my words. Just not my name. They erased me from the will, told everyone I'd chosen to stay out of it, and when I almost drowned at the lake, they laughed. I thought silence kept the peace. Turns out it just helped them rewrite the story. What happens when the forgotten daughter stops staying quiet? What happens when the truth speaks for itself? By the time I pulled into the gravel drive, the sun was just beginning to dip behind the trees. Shadows stretched across the grass like long, patient fingers. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel. The house was already full of voices, familiar cadences of people I used to trust. I stepped out of the car, straightened my cardigan, and smoothed down my hair. No one came to greet me, not a glance from the porch. Verena stood center stage in her sleeveless linen dress, wine glass in one hand, gesturing with the other as if she were hosting a fundraiser, not a family barbecue. When her eyes met mine, she gave a short nod, half welcome, half warning. "Oh, Mireille, you made it," she said, like she hadn't noticed the RSVP I sent 3 weeks ago. "Would have been strange to miss it," I replied softly, clutching the tote bag tighter against my side. I walked past them, past the flickering tiki torches, and made my way toward the lake's edge. The dock creaked under my feet. I could still smell the oil stain I helped Dad apply to the wood a year before he passed. That scent had faded now, replaced by overcooked meat and citronella. I heard my nephew laugh about some joke I didn't catch. Someone opened a bottle with a pop. My mother's voice floated in the air, praising Verena's gala plans. No one asked where I'd been. No one asked how the house was holding up, or if I'd needed help fixing the leaking roof last winter. I stayed quiet. That was my role. Silent, safe, invisible. The grill flared up. Garrick's laugh bellowed across the yard. A cousin I hadn't seen in 5 years asked where I was working now. Before I could answer, Verena spoke over me. "She's doing something quiet, library work or artist in retreat or something. You know how she likes her space." I smiled. I didn't correct her. Later, Verena called out across the dock, "Let's see if the quiet one still knows how to swim." I turned in time to see her striding toward me, barefoot and smug. My heart skipped. "Verena?" I barely got the word out before her hands shoved my back. Hard. I hit the water sideways, breath torn from my lungs. Cold swallowed me whole. I kicked, panicked. My foot caught on something near the dock post. My chest burned. I surfaced once, just enough to gasp, and that's when I heard her. "Don't be so dramatic," she laughed. "You're fine." Laughter rippled behind her. The kind of laughter people do when they don't know where the line is. Or worse, they do. I clung to the edge of the dock. No one offered a hand. I pulled myself out alone, coughing lake water, hair dripping, shirt clinging to my skin. My knees scraped against the wood, but I didn't wince. I didn't speak. One of the younger cousins, 16 maybe, held up his phone. "Already at 52 likes," he grinned. "Lake drama queen." I didn't even look at him. Back on the lawn, no one stopped eating. No one said sorry. My mother poured another glass of lemonade. Garrick passed Verena a skewer of shrimp, saying, "Still got that arm strength, huh?" I sat on the stone wall near the garden, water pooling around my shoes. Verena flipped burgers like nothing had happened. Her white dress stayed dry. My hands trembled slightly, but I pressed them into my thighs. They didn't just let me fall. They never planned to catch me. By nightfall, the sky turned a bruised navy. I slipped into the bedroom at the back of the house, the one they still called the spare, even though it used to be mine. I closed the door softly behind me. No footsteps followed. I pulled out the tote and set it on the desk by the window. The old wood still bore faint rings from my father's coffee mugs. I reached in and pulled out the small flash drive. The metal was cool against my fingers. I had found it 2 months ago, tucked inside a music box of his I was supposed to donate. I hadn't looked yet, but tonight the silence felt different. Not like surrender, more like preparation. I plugged it into my laptop, but didn't click anything yet. That crack? It started with a question I hadn't asked in years. I didn't sleep much, not because of the lake. That part had already settled into something dense and cold inside my chest, like a stone I wasn't planning to remove anytime soon. It was everything else, the laughter afterward, the way my wet footprints dried before anyone noticed I was missing. By morning, the house was full of movement again. Someone had started the coffee too early, so it sat bitter and lukewarm by the time I poured myself a cup. I took it out to the garden table near the stone path, still in the same jeans I'd dried overnight on the chair. The others were already gathered, as if yesterday had been nothing more than a picnic. Verena sat at the far end, scrolling her phone with surgical efficiency. Her sunglasses were too large for her face, like always, but she wore them like armor. Garrick was talking about the price of lumber, again. My mother asked if anyone had seen the paper. No one mentioned the lake, or the laughter, or the clip. Verena finally looked up. "Did you sleep all right?" she asked, sipping orange juice like she wasn't pretending. "Sure," I said, like a rock at the bottom of the bay. No one responded. Garrick chuckled and leaned back. "You've always been so expressive." One of the nephews made flailing motions with his arms and mimicked me coughing. "Help! I'm dying in 3 feet of water!" More laughter. Not the kind that invites you in, but the kind that locks the door behind you. I looked down at my coffee and stirred it. Wrote a quick line in the margins of a napkin I kept in my pocket. Even drowning is dramatic, when it doesn't fit the narrative. They moved on to brunch plans. Verena suggested the bistro downtown, the one with the goat cheese frittatas. I nodded, still invisible. That was when someone, Aunt Marilyn I think, said, "It was just so inspiring how Verena won that art scholarship years ago. Full ride, right?" Verena smiled modestly. "It was competitive, but yeah, full scholarship. I guess they liked what they saw." I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. My body already knew how to swallow heat without showing smoke. What Marilyn didn't know, what nobody remembered, was that the scholarship had been mine first. I had applied quietly, on a whim. My father had helped me prep the portfolio. He even drove me to the interview. The letter came in May. Acceptance, full coverage, room and board. It sat on my desk for 2 days. Then, Verena found it. She had been rejected by the same program. Her eyes were red. Her voice was flat when she said, "You weren't even planning to go. You hate crowds. You said that." And I did. I really did. So I nodded. She cried in the living room while I typed the email declining the offer. "I just want her to have a shot," I told Dad. He watched me closely. "You sure?" he asked. "She needs it more," I lied. No one ever talked about that again. Except my memory. My memory keeps receipts. After brunch, I stepped away and opened my laptop in the den. The Wi-Fi was spotty, but I didn't need much. Just an old folder, buried in the email account I barely used anymore. I clicked through the archived drafts and found it. Subject line, Scholarship Decline, Murray Lowell. Attached, Portfolio, Final.pdf. I scrolled through the list of attachments. There it was. My name on every slide, my father's notes in the margins. Every brushstroke, every caption. Mine. I leaned back and stared at the screen. They erased me from the story and replaced it with someone easier to praise. Someone who looked better in a press release. I closed the laptop, but not before downloading a copy. I wasn't ready to use it. Not yet. But I needed to remind myself that I had existed here, even if they had all agreed not to remember it. Out on the porch, they were arguing over where to eat. "Verena should pick," my mother said. "She always knows the good places." "Is that what we're calling it now?" I mumbled. No one heard. Later that afternoon, I watched as Verena redirected every conversation to herself. When someone mentioned how the garden had bloomed this year, she smiled and said, "Yes, I told Mom we needed more hydrangeas." She hadn't. When someone asked about the mortgage, Garrick answered for her. When someone asked me about the house, Verena cut in with, "Oh, Murray just likes to stay low-key. Nothing to worry about." I realized something as I watched them. This family didn't need a villain. They just needed a void they could pour their own version of me into. One they could edit. One that didn't remember. But I remembered. That night, when the sky turned soft again, I opened my laptop one more time. I searched for the original acceptance email. There it was, still marked unread. When people erase you long enough, you start leaving traces where they least expect. I stayed in my room most of the morning. Outside, the house came alive again. Porch doors sliding open, flip-flops smacking against the deck, someone tapping on a phone keyboard like they were solving a crisis that wouldn't matter in an hour. The smell of toast drifted in from the hallway. I let it pass. Eventually, I slipped on a fresh shirt and moved through the kitchen for coffee. Verena was at the dining table, setting down placemats with the kind of purpose that was never about hospitality, just performance. Garrick was folding a stack of papers nearby, the edge of his mouth pulled up in something that passed for a smirk. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Verena didn't look up. "Just a light lunch," she said. "Some of us thought it'd be a good time to go over Dad's things. Legacy stuff. It's nothing formal." She laid down another placemat, then paused as if remembering something trivial. "We figured you wouldn't want to get into all that." It wasn't a question. I poured my coffee. The silence between us felt loud, like something scraping underneath the floorboards. About 20 minutes later, I saw Garrick on the side porch, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a courtroom deposition. "You heading to that estate meeting thing?" I asked. He blinked. "Yeah. I mean, you're coming, right?" I shook my head once. "Didn't know I was invited." He hesitated. "Oh, I just figured you'd be in the loop." I didn't bother correcting him. Instead, I wandered to the garden on the far side of the house. Found the pot I'd planted 5 years ago. The rosemary had turned woody and gray. I watered it anyway, even though I knew better. From across the patio, I could hear voices rising. Verena's mostly, clipped and controlled, assigning chairs, distributing folders. She'd always had a knack for sounding like she was managing something bigger than herself, like we should be grateful to orbit her. I sat with my back against the stone wall, watching a small bird peck at the ground. Then I heard it, her voice through the cracked kitchen window. "With everything Mireille's been through," she said, casual like a weather report, "we just thought it might be better if she didn't have to deal with this kind of stress." A pause. "You know, with her history, financial stuff gets complicated." My stomach turned. I didn't move. She was using my own story against me. The months I'd spent in therapy after Dad died. The prescription I'd briefly taken to help with sleep. The time I'd pulled back from social media just to catch my breath. Twisted now into a narrative that painted me as unstable. No one pushed back. Not Garrick. Not my mother. Just the soft sound of coffee being stirred, and the clink of silverware being arranged. Later, I saw my cousin Lila pass by with a notebook. She saw me but didn't stop. Just gave a polite nod, like I was someone's friend from church she barely remembered. This wasn't an oversight, it was a design. They weren't building walls, they were turning their backs. It occurred to me then that they didn't see themselves as excluding me. In their version, I had removed myself. Too quiet, too private, too difficult to place. But they still wanted my silence dressed up as consent. I thought back to something Dad once whispered to me on a winter night when Verena was off at college, and I was trying to decide whether to apply to a residency in New Mexico. "Don't let them write over your part, Mireille," he said, pressing a hot mug into my hands. "Even if they speak louder, even if they publish it first." I hadn't thought of that night in years, but here they were, rewriting anyway. I stood. The room was full when I stepped in. Garrick had taken the end of the table, flanked by Verena and our mother. The rest of them, cousins, in-laws, polite sympathizers, sat in a half-circle, leafing through documents like they were at a planning committee. Everything stopped when I walked in. Verena's voice caught mid-sentence. We were just... I walked to the nearest empty chair and rested my hands on the back. If I'm not part of this legacy, I said quietly, then don't use my name to decorate it. They looked at me like I'd dropped something heavy in the center of the table. Maybe I had. No one followed me when I left that room. Not a single footstep echoed behind mine. I didn't expect them to. That kind of silence doesn't come from surprise. It comes from habit. They were used to letting me walk away. I moved upstairs, the walls narrowing around me like a funnel. The second floor still smelled like old lemon polish and dust, like the memory of a home rather than the thing itself. I passed the guest room, my room, once upon a time, and paused in front of the study. It was still locked. Of course it was. That door had stayed closed since the funeral. Verena said it was to preserve Dad's space. I knew better. Locked doors always served the person holding the key, not the one missing what's inside. Down the hall, I heard movement. Light steps. Verena appeared at the top of the stairs, arms crossed, wearing the silver cuff bracelet. My bracelet. The one Dad gave me for my 35th birthday. I remembered the way he handed it over in a little velvet pouch. No card, no fuss. He said, "You get this because you stayed." And here she was, wearing it like she'd forgotten. Or worse, decided it didn't matter. She didn't even glance at me as she walked by. Just tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and muttered something about checking the guest count for Sunday's brunch. I didn't say anything. My fingers curled just slightly. Not from anger, but recognition. That was always her trick. Don't take what isn't yours. Just act like it always was. I turned into the hallway where the family photo wall used to be. But it wasn't the same anymore. The frames had been updated, sleeker, all black and white prints now. Clean, curated, and incomplete. My baby photos? Gone. The snapshot of Dad and me fishing on the dock the summer I turned 12? Replaced with Verena shaking hands with a city councilman at a ribbon cutting. A blown-up print of her receiving that scholarship, smile full of polished charm, now hung above the mantel like a centerpiece. It wasn't even yours to hang, I whispered. The walls didn't answer. They never did. Back in the hallway, my phone buzzed. A notification from Sterling. I stepped into the corner by the linen closet to read it in private. Subject line: Most recent version of will, per your request. There was a PDF attachment. The message itself was short. Mireille, this is the latest executed version we found in probate files. You are no longer listed as secondary beneficiary. No physical signature, only a verbal amendment recorded during a clarifying call initiated by Verena. Let me know if you want to discuss. S. I opened the file. The words felt mechanical on the screen. Line items, allocation notes, charitable deductions. But the absence hit like a stone. My name wasn't there. Not once. Not even in the miscellaneous items section. I had been erased by the same hand that had smiled at me in the kitchen that morning. I didn't delete the email. I didn't forward it either. I just stared at the screen until the text stopped moving and my vision settled. That bracelet. The photos. The estate. None of it had been accidental. I thought back to the months after Dad's stroke. He'd started to forget dates, repeat stories, mix up timelines. That's when Verena swooped in, said she'd handle the paperwork so I could just focus on Dad. I had believed her. Now I saw it clearly. That's when the edits began. Quiet, clean, almost invisible. I walked slowly to the end of the hall, where his bookcases lined the study wall. I tapped the bottom shelf twice. It was a thing we used to do. Just a silly signal between us when I was a kid. 2 taps means it's still ours, he'd say, usually about some tool or book Verena wanted to claim. The panel shifted with a soft click. Dust floated in the thin slice of light that broke through. My hand slid behind the shelf, fingers grazing cardboard. I pulled out a worn envelope. No stamps, no return address. Just my name, in my father's handwriting. Familiar, shaky at the edges, but his. I didn't need to open it to know it mattered, but I opened it anyway. The paper inside the envelope was folded 3 times, each crease worn down like it had been opened and refolded many times. My father's handwriting was unmistakable, a little more fragile than I remembered, but still deliberate. The words were simple. He wasn't one for sentiment, but the final line echoed in my ears long after I'd closed the envelope. "You are the root of this," he'd written. "Let no one take credit for what you grew." I carried that with me the next day as I stepped through the front entrance of the Asheville Museum. The building was bright and polished, walls washed in soft light, the hum of low conversation bouncing off the stone floors. A large banner hung over the welcome desk. Local Legacy Series celebrating Riverlight. I hadn't been invited. I knew about the event only because an old friend from the co-op had texted me a link. Verena had said nothing, of course. Not a word at dinner, not a whisper during her estate meeting. Nothing. The receptionist looked up from her laptop. "Oh, we weren't expecting, but go ahead in." I gave a small nod, too tired to fake a smile. Inside the main exhibit hall, guests milled around the open space, sipping Prosecco from thin plastic flutes. I scanned the room and saw Verena across the floor, dressed in a tailored navy dress and low heels. Her hair was pinned neatly, lipstick precise. She was greeting donors like they were lifelong friends. No sign of discomfort, no indication of shame. My eyes found the mural first, Riverlight. The installation curved along the far wall, a flow of color and light that still carried the ache I remembered pouring into it. Each stroke was mine. I had painted through grief, turning memory into movement, loss into something warm. But the plaque beneath it stopped me cold. Commission design by Verena Lowell. A laugh almost escaped me, low, bitter. My legs carried me forward, but the rest of me felt stuck in some invisible cement. There, under the name of the woman who hadn't lifted a brush, was my father's favorite quote etched in brass. "What roots remain still hold the soil." It wasn't hers to use. None of it was. I leaned closer, jaw clenched, eyes narrowing. The texture in the paint confirmed what I already knew. The digital recreation had been based on my original sketches. My style wasn't something you could fake. It was layered in how the strokes leaned into each other, how the color deepened in the corners. You could only know that if you'd made it. And I had. 10 years ago, I had saved those files on an old hard drive. Verena had borrowed it, said she needed to back up Dad's records during the cleanup after the funeral. I hadn't thought twice. Until now. The Q&A portion began 20 minutes later. Verena stood at the front of the room like a curator, poised and ready. "Riverlight," she began, "was conceived as a love letter to this city, and to our father. It represents continuity, resilience, beauty from brokenness." She thanked the museum for recognizing her work. She called it a labor of love. No one questioned it. They clapped. I didn't. I stepped forward as the last applause faded. "Excuse me," I said calmly, my voice carrying just enough weight to hush the chatter. Verena's smile faltered. "Oh, Mireille," she said. "Didn't expect you to be here." "I know," I replied. "You didn't invite me." A few people shifted in their seats. I walked to the front, not hurried, not hesitant. I turned to face the room, not her. The original concept of Riverlight came from a time in my life when I had nothing else but a brush and a memory. It was born from the ache of watching my father disappear day by day, and every curve, every layer, every light wash on that wall, I pointed to the mural, was mine. Silence. Tense, brittle. Verena gave a short laugh. Mireille's always had a vivid imagination. I turned to her. And you've always had a habit of calling truth a tantrum when it doesn't serve you. Her smile cracked. The curator stood awkwardly nearby, looking from her to me and back again. Someone from the second row whispered, "Is she serious?" I turned back to the audience. I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm here to reclaim what was never supposed to be taken. That mural isn't a collaboration. It's not a family project. It's not a tribute Verena helped design. It's a piece of me, my grief, my art, my legacy. Verena opened her mouth to respond, but found nothing waiting there. I walked away. Near the hallway, a woman with silver-streaked hair leaned in as I passed. "You should have been the keynote speaker," she said, just loud enough for Verena to hear. I stopped at the far end of the room and turned one last time to face the mural. This time, I didn't see it as something stolen. I saw it as something returned. After the art gala, I didn't return to the lake house right away. I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like polished lies. I sat in my car outside the community center for a long time, watching the porch lights blink on across the street, one by one, as if the world was quietly folding into itself. It was late when I finally drove over to the memorial dinner. The parking lot was already full, the last stragglers slipping inside with floral arrangements and bottles of wine. I wasn't early, I wasn't late, I was deliberate. Inside, the room hummed with the familiar notes of small-town performance. Name tags stuck on blouses, cheap folding chairs draped in fabric, ambient jazz, humming low from speakers in the ceiling. A slideshow flickered to life on the projector as I took my seat at the back, unnoticed. The first slide came up. In loving memory of Augustus Lowell. Then in gold cursive, with gratitude to the family, V. Lowell and guests, not V and M. Lowell, just her. The pictures began. Dad holding a baby, me, though the caption didn't say it. Then Dad at the cabin, fishing, again with me, my face blurred in the sunlight, and no label to mark it. Then came my artwork, my sketches, the ones he framed himself and hung in his den. They now flashed across the screen with a single tag in the corner. Artwork courtesy of the Lowell family. Not mine, just family, which apparently didn't include me. Someone 2 rows ahead leaned over and whispered, "Didn't Mireille do that one?" Verena, already standing by the podium, answered before I could. "Oh, those were family projects. Collaborative. Dad was big on teamwork." Liar. She clicked to the next image, a photo of her presenting a grant at City Hall, and I realized, with something cold and bitter in my spine, that this slideshow wasn't about Dad at all. It was a eulogy for her version of our history. Next came the reading. Verena opened a slim, hardbound book and began, her voice soft and reverent. These pages are excerpts from a legacy memoir, compiled from Dad's journals and our shared memories. Shared? She read a passage about planting tomatoes in the backyard. I'd written that in my own notebook after a summer we spent together before her first divorce. I remembered the exact phrasing, the way dirt under your nails made grief quieter. She read it word for word, as if she'd lived it. Then came a story about a little girl who used to bring their father pressed violets in an old poetry book. "My little niece," Verena said. She was always so gentle, quiet, like a breeze more than a person. A niece. I stared at the page of the program booklet in my lap. My name was nowhere. Not in the artist acknowledgments. Not in the contributor notes. Not even listed among surviving family. I wasn't just overlooked, I had been redacted. The final straw didn't snap. It dissolved, slow and soundless, like sugar in warm tea. I stood. The room wasn't packed, but it was full enough. Heads turned, forks paused mid-air. I walked calmly toward the front, my shoes quiet on the carpet. Verena looked up, a flicker of something in her eyes. Confusion, maybe, or fear. I didn't ask for the microphone. I didn't need it. "My name," I said clearly, "is Mireille." Not a niece, not a family guest. I'm his daughter. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. I held up the program booklet. I wrote these words, I said. The ones about the tomatoes, the pressed violets, the quiet. Verena stepped forward. Mireille, I think you're misremembering. I think you're mistaking silence for consent, I said, cutting her off. I don't need to be written in. I've already been living it. She went still. Her hands twitched at her sides, unsure whether to defend or deflect. For a long second, no one moved. Then, from the far corner, my Uncle James clapped once. Just once. But it was enough. We left the memorial dinner in silence. Even Garrick, who usually couldn't resist cracking a half-hearted joke or checking his phone every 3 minutes, kept his mouth shut. My mother walked stiffly ahead, clutching her purse like it was a fragile urn. I followed a few paces behind, not because I wanted space, but because I already had it. That's what happens when people cut you out. Eventually, you don't walk beside them anymore. You don't walk behind either. You just stop asking where the path is. The next morning, I arrived at Sterling DeWitt's office 5 minutes early. I waited outside until the clock struck exactly 9. Then I stepped inside. The office was quiet, with high ceilings and tall windows that made even the morning light feel polite. Sterling stood to greet me with a firm nod, not overdone. Morning, Mireille. Thank you for doing this, I said. He motioned toward a long oak table in the conference room. Everyone's just about settled. Inside, Verena sat at the far end, next to Garrick. My mother was beside her, lips pressed so tightly they'd gone pale. On the other side of the room sat one of Dad's longtime friends, Alan Pierce, a former neighbor and semi-retired CPA who'd been invited as a neutral witness. I took the seat directly across from Verena. She didn't look up. Sterling began with routine pleasantries, flipping open a slim file folder and clearing his throat. Before we move into any updated documents, I was asked by Mireille to begin today's meeting with something she provided last week, a file found among her father's possessions. For full transparency, I've reviewed the contents and verified the timestamp and source. Verena shifted. Garrick glanced at her. Sterling turned the monitor toward the room and clicked play. The screen flickered, then lit up with the face of my father. Tired, older, but unmistakably clear-eyed. He sat at his desk, the same one Verena had since cleared of everything but her version of events. If anything happens, he began, and the paperwork gets fuzzy, I need you to remember this. His voice had that quiet authority he always carried. Not showy, but firm. Mireille built the mural, all of it. The sketches, the color theory, the first brushstroke to the last. Verena helped set up the scaffolding, but she didn't paint a thing. He paused, took a breath. She also gave up the art scholarship for her sister, told me not to tell anyone, said Verena needed it more. That's just who she is. The room went still. Sterling folded his hands. This was recorded 1 month before Mr. Lowell's passing. The metadata confirms the file has not been altered. Verena leaned forward. He was taking pain meds at the time. That could have affected his clarity. Sterling didn't flinch. He speaks coherently, references dates accurately, and uses language consistent with his prior statements. From a legal standpoint, the recording holds. Garrick shifted in his seat and looked away. My mother stared down at her lap, her fingers gripping the edge of her scarf. Before anyone could speak again, Sterling opened another file. This time, it was a hard copy, bound, initialed, notarized. This, he said, is the original 2021 version of Augustus Lowell's will. In it, Mireille is listed as co-beneficiary to all intellectual property, creative holdings, and personal effects tied to the family home. He looked at Verena. The revised version submitted in 2022 was never officially filed. No witness signatures. No confirmation of verbal consent beyond a handwritten note from Verena herself. He let the silence settle. In other words, he concluded, the 2021 will stands. Verena's lips parted, then closed again. Her throat moved like she was about to swallow something too large. I didn't speak. I didn't smile. I just watched her slowly realize that the narrative had slipped out of her hands. This wasn't revenge. It was correction. She looked at me, finally, not with anger, not even with guilt, just the slack, stunned face of someone who'd never planned for her lie to be challenged in broad daylight. I stood. No one stopped me. As I reached the door, I heard her behind me, soft but sharp. You planned this. I paused, turned just enough to meet her eyes. No, I said. I just stopped hiding. You wrote your downfall yourself. Then I walked out and let the air close behind me. The door to the law office clicked shut behind me, but the silence followed me out like a shadow. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated, just still. By noon, I was standing at the reception desk of Women Against Inherited Silence. Naomi met me in the entryway, clipboard in hand, her reading glasses perched halfway down her nose. "You sure?" she asked, not softly, but kindly. I nodded once. "Yes." She led me into a small conference room tucked in the back of the building. The space smelled like lavender and clean paper. Sunlight cut across the table. The documents were already laid out, neatly stacked beside a mug that read, "Protect her voice." Naomi slid the folder toward me. "It's all here. Donation of full amount, no contingencies, no nameplate, no board seat. Just use it," I said, "for women who've had to give up more than they should have." She gave me a look that didn't require words. We weren't friends, not really, but she understood. That was enough. I signed the papers, page by page. $340,000. The university fund Verena had once laughed about, assuming it was hers by default. The final signature pressed into the page like a full stop at the end of a chapter I no longer needed to reread. Naomi didn't thank me. She just said, "You did this for yourself. That's enough." I drove back to the house in silence. No music, just the hum of the tires and the slow realization that I didn't feel hollow. I felt vacant, maybe, but on purpose, like something had been cleared out. At the lake house, I parked by the shed and let myself in through the side door. The main living room was empty, but I heard voices faintly in the distance. Probably Verena and Garrick arguing over optics. Or dinner. Or both. I didn't go upstairs. I didn't touch anything that wasn't mine. Instead, I walked into Dad's old study, opened the second drawer of his desk, and retrieved what I came for. 2 sketchbooks, a framed photo of us from the Riverlight build, and his flannel shirt. That was it. No heirlooms, no trinkets. I didn't want the lamp they'd fight over or the china they pretended was antique. I took only what mattered. What had meaning before it had market value. As I zipped my bag, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I checked it on the back porch, sitting on the steps with the flannel draped across my shoulders. The message was brief. "Hey, it's Lauren. I know we haven't talked in a while. I found out Verena told you I didn't want to stay in touch. That wasn't true. I'm sorry for believing her. I guess I didn't want to know the truth back then. Anyway, if you ever want to talk, I'm here." I saved the message. Didn't call back. I didn't need to fix anything. Not anymore. I needed space, and now I had it. The sun had started to lean west by the time I made one last walk through the house. I moved slowly, not out of sentiment, but out of respect. This place had held my silence for too long. It deserved to know I was leaving it behind. In the kitchen, I took a blank sheet of notepaper from the drawer. I wrote, "I am not angry, I am finished. You'll feel this absence more than my presence ever cost." I folded it once, set it by the keys, and placed them both on the counter. When I stepped outside, I closed the door gently. Not slamming it, just letting it seal. And there he was. Garrick stood at the far end of the driveway, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't say a word, just watched. I nodded once, then turned, and kept walking. 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of birds, not voices. The window beside my bed at Silver Pines overlooked a row of lavender bushes just starting to bloom. The scent drifted in with the breeze, warm and clean. I wrapped my hands around a ceramic mug of black coffee and walked barefoot out to the small garden path that circled the residency's inner courtyard. No one here asked me where I'd been. No one called me dramatic. No one called me anything at all. And it was perfect. That morning, after watering the seedlings I'd helped plant the week before, I stopped by the front desk to check for mail. There was an envelope addressed to me in thick black pen, forwarded from Garrick's office. No return address. No sender name. Inside was a folded sheet of letterhead from a real estate law firm I didn't recognize, and tucked behind it, a second page. Handwritten. Familiar cursive. It was Verina's handwriting. The letter wasn't dated. It had never been sent. I sat on the bench near the rose trellis and read. "I know you'll never see this," it began. "But if you do, I want you to understand it was never about the mural, or the scholarship, or even Dad. It was about him, Garrick. The way he looked at you. The way he listened when you spoke, even when you didn't mean to be interesting." My breath caught, not because I was shocked, but because it explained more than anything she'd ever said aloud. "You didn't steal anything from me," she wrote. "You just existed. And that was enough to make me invisible in a house where I used to control every room." She had underlined that sentence. I folded the page slowly, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it in the drawer of my writing desk. Not to save, just to keep it from the wind. Later that afternoon, Naomi stopped by during her outreach rounds. She leaned on the fence beside the community herb garden. "Verina's pulled out of 3 events," she said casually, like reading a weather report. "People talk. Donors are backing off." I raised an eyebrow. "Did she go on damage control?" "She tried," Naomi said, "but you can't spin a legacy built on other people's work, especially not when the original author starts telling her side." I didn't feel smug. I felt still. The mural at the local school had been quietly removed. The scholarship fund bearing Verina's name had been put on hold, pending audit. There were no scandals, no lawsuits, just the slow quieting of someone used to the sound of her own applause. That evening, I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and wrote one more letter, my own this time. "You didn't hate me because I took anything," I wrote. "You hated me because I never asked you for permission to be." I signed it but didn't seal it. Didn't send it. Instead, I tore it into wide strips, carried them to the compost pile by the edge of the garden, and gently folded them into the soil. A resident I'd met only once passed by with a trowel and paused. "Planting something?" "Just lavender and sage," I said. "Is that for memory or forgiveness?" "Neither," I replied. "It's for space." The next morning, I sat beneath the arbor, with my sketchpad open on my lap. I didn't draw Riverlight. I didn't draw the lake or the house or the people who'd taught me what silence could cost. I drew light, and water, and a woman, alone, whole, facing forward. She had no label, no title. "Hi, my name's Mireya." My sister called me brain dead in front of our entire office. People laughed. No one defended me. What they didn't know? I wasn't just the quiet girl in data. I was married to the man who just bought the company. But that's not even the part that hurt the most. It's what she did years ago. The scholarship I never got. The email I was never supposed to read. The silence my mother still chooses. How do you confront a family that erases you while smiling to your face? And when the truth finally comes out, is it too late to get back what they stole? Let me tell you what really happened. Mondays always started with silence. Not the peaceful kind you enjoy with a warm cup of coffee, but the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a heavy coat you never asked to wear. At 7:42 a.m., I stepped into the elevator of Aurora Creative Inc. on the 17th floor, gripping the strap of my laptop bag and keeping my eyes on the brushed steel wall. I could smell peppermint gum and someone's cologne, overpowering and expensive. Everyone stood just close enough to suggest friendliness, but not enough to make eye contact. That was office intimacy, performative and practiced. Celesta stood in the front, her hair pulled into a bun so precise it looked cruel. She didn't glance back. She never did. Not in the elevator, not in meetings, and certainly not when people asked if I was the new assistant from analytics. I wasn't new. I'd been here 3 years. I built the system they use to track user retention. But I never corrected them. Correcting people in rooms where your sister holds the power feels like playing chess with only pawns. I slipped out the elevator just after her, staying a few paces behind. The office was already humming, screens lighting up, phones buzzing, people greeting each other like they hadn't just seen each other on Slack 10 minutes ago. My desk sat at the far end by the window. Not the view side, just far enough that I could pretend to be part of the view. I unpacked my lunch, chickpea salad in a reusable container, with lemon vinaigrette and a single sprig of mint. No one cared, but it mattered to me. I always believed the little things were where dignity lived when respect was missing. I powered on my laptop. The screen blinked twice before settling into the familiar dashboard. The first email was from Celesta. Subject: Quick favor, message. Can you bring coffee to the strategy room? Use my card at the cafe. Medium roast, oat milk, no sugar, the X. No, please. No, I know you're not my intern. Just the way she always asked. Casually enough to pretend it wasn't a command. I replied, sure. That was all. Not because I didn't have words, but because I'd learned long ago that giving people more than they offer you tends to make them uncomfortable. The walk to the cafe wasn't long, but long enough for 2 junior associates to pass by and not realize I was in earshot. She's like, Celesta's little shadow, one of them whispered, chuckling. Didn't she used to be something in analytics? She's something all right. Celesta's coffee runner. I didn't flinch. I didn't correct them. I just stood in line, bought the coffee, and walked back. By the time I placed the cup on the conference table, Celesta didn't even look up. She nodded, barely, and went back to her slide deck. Her nails were painted a shade of red that made even apologies look calculated. Later that afternoon, I opened the quarterly performance report. I had spent 2 full weeks running regressions, cleaning datasets, building predictive models for user segmentation that ended up shaving nearly $600K off the budget. I scrolled through the document slowly. Strategy team credited, design team credited. Celesta's name appeared 3 times. Mine? Nowhere. Just 1 line in the appendix. Technical support, internal analytics division. I leaned back. My throat tightened, but not in a way I could name. I didn't feel sad. I didn't even feel angry. I felt unlisted, like an uninvited guest to my own contribution. An email pinged. Subject: Fantastic job, Celesta. You're a powerhouse. From HR, I was CC'd. No message. Just a thread of applause that never reached my name. I stood up, walked to the restroom, and closed myself in the last stall. Not to cry, just to breathe. The kind of breath you take when the air around you doesn't recognize you as belonging to it. Back at my desk, I opened a blank document. Typed a single line. Am I invisible, or are they pretending not to see me? I deleted it before saving. Words wouldn't save me in a company built on performance and proximity. Lunch came. I sat at the usual table. Alone. Everyone else huddled around takeout bags and overpriced smoothies. Celesta walked past, her heels clicking like punctuation marks on a sentence that never included me. She paused. Glanced at my lunch. Still the same, she murmured, not unkindly. Not kindly either. I didn't respond. She walked away, and I felt something stir. Not shame, not sadness. Something sharper. By Tuesday morning, the air in the office felt different. Heavier. Like everyone knew something was coming, but no one wanted to say it aloud. Celesta hadn't spoken to me since the day before. She didn't need to. Her silence had always done more damage than her words. At 8:43 a.m., I was finishing a data visualization draft when her message popped up on Slack. Hey, could you speak for 5 mins at the 9 a.m. huddle about the new customer behavior patterns? No deck needed. Just a quick share. No deck, no prep, no prior context. It was already 8:43. And she wanted me to speak, a word she only used when setting people up to fall. Still, I said, sure. I didn't say thank you. That's the thing about me. I used to fill the quiet with gratitude just to keep the temperature down. I wasn't doing that anymore. 9 o'clock came fast. I walked into the main conference room to find nearly every manager and director seated. Even HR was there. The CEO's assistant was tapping her pen like a metronome against her notepad. Celesta stood near the front with her arms folded, the kind of stance that made people think she was in charge even when she wasn't speaking. I noticed she didn't bring her laptop. She wasn't here to lead, she was here to watch. She waved me up with a small gesture, like I was a server refilling her wine glass. Mireya will walk us through some behavioral insights we're tracking, she said. I cleared my throat and stepped forward. There was no screen behind me, just blank glass and the distorted reflection of a woman I barely recognized. I've been tracking a trend in user drop-off during onboarding, I began, hands tightening around the clicker that wasn't connected to anything. It seems to correlate with the timing of email nudges and— Celesta cut me off mid-sentence. Sweetheart, she said, loud enough to freeze the room. This isn't a TED Talk. Are you brain dead? The words didn't land softly. They sliced the air like scissors through paper. There was a pause. Then it came, the snickering. First one, then two. And then it broke out like a nervous fire. Some laughed because they thought they were supposed to. Others because they'd been waiting to see if I'd finally crack. A guy 2 rows back lifted his phone. Not to email, not to check his calendar. He was recording. I stood there, blinking. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I was trying not to say too much. I could feel the heat rising from my collarbone up to my cheeks. My ears buzzed. My lips parted. I'll follow up with the report later, I said, voice tight. I didn't wait for permission. I walked back to my seat and sank into it, staring straight ahead like I was still presenting. Celesta continued like nothing happened. That was her gift, humiliation disguised as humor. The meeting droned on. I heard none of it. Once it ended, people gathered near the coffee station, chatting like they'd just watched a sitcom rerun. No one looked at me. No one checked if I was okay. I wasn't surprised. I'd learned long ago that silence isn't absence. It's a choice. I made my way to the bathroom. The second stall was empty. I locked the door, sat down, clothes still on, and leaned forward with my arms on my thighs. I wasn't crying. My hands weren't shaking. Not yet. I opened my phone. No messages, no emails, no Slack pings asking if I was all right. I started a new email in my drafts folder. Subject, resignation, Mireya Veilbody. Effective immediately. I hovered over the send button, then hit backspace. Slowly, deliberately, line by line until the screen was blank again. That email wasn't for them. It was for me. To prove I still had a way out. That I could choose to leave instead of being pushed. Back at my desk, no one said a word. Celesta walked past around noon, tapping her nails against her phone. She didn't pause. I opened Slack. The thread from the meeting was already pinned. No mention of what happened. No correction. No context. I stared at the message, then minimized it. By 3:10 p.m., I told the office manager I wasn't feeling well and scheduled a ride home. Outside, the weather had shifted. Overcast skies, slick sidewalks, trees shedding their color. Autumn in Minneapolis had a way of making everything look cinematic, even when you felt like the extra. The rideshare driver didn't speak, just the occasional GPS cue and the sound of tires gliding over wet pavement. I looked out the window at the city I used to love. I wondered if people passing by could tell I'd been embarrassed in a room full of people who wore smiles like shields. I whispered to myself, Maybe I am brain dead. Or maybe they've just made me feel that way. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed, "This is where the story changes." I didn't know how yet, but I knew it had to. By the time I got home, the sky had turned the color of burnt peach, just enough light to see the silhouettes of the trees lining the street. I didn't turn on the television. I didn't check the news. I just kicked off my shoes, walked into the kitchen, and put the kettle on. There was something about the whistling of a kettle in an empty house that made everything feel more honest. You can't pretend to be okay when the only thing breaking the silence is steam. As I waited, I noticed the light above the sink flickering again. That old bulb had been temperamental for months, but tonight it flashed just once, quick and sharp, then held steady. Like it was trying to tell me it remembered too. I leaned on the counter and looked out the window, where leaves swirled like they couldn't decide where to land. And just like that, I was 17 again. Sitting at this same kitchen table, a scholarship letter unopened in front of me. My hands trembling, not from fear, but from hope that for once, just once, someone outside of this house had seen what I could really do. Celesta had walked in that day wearing her debate blazer, still riding the high of another school award. She hadn't even looked at the envelope. She just said, "Did you check the mailbox for mine?" I remember laughing, nervously. "This one's addressed to me." She'd said nothing after that, just hummed a little tune and walked past. I waited 3 days, then a week. But no follow-up email came, no phone call, no congratulations. I didn't know until 2 years later, during a reunion dinner with my old friend Silas, what really happened. He stirred his drink, didn't meet my eyes. I wasn't supposed to say anything, but I held my breath. Not because I feared what came next, but because I already knew. Celesta reached out to the foundation. She told them you struggled under pressure, that you had episodes. Episodes? I repeated, more stunned by the creativity of the lie than the lie itself. She said she was trying to protect you, said the stress would break you. I didn't speak after that. I just nodded and chewed my food until it felt like paper in my mouth. Back in the kitchen now, 15 years later, I poured the hot water over a bag of chamomile and sat in the same chair I had all those years ago. The grain in the wood hadn't changed. The lines in me had. My phone buzzed. Voicemail, Mom. I put the mug down and pressed play. "Mireya, sweetheart," she began in that soft voice she always used when she needed me to be docile. "I heard about the meeting. Your sister's under a lot of pressure. I'm not saying she handled it right, but maybe this isn't the time to stir things. She's up for promotion. You know how hard she's worked." My mouth twisted, but I didn't interrupt. I never did. "You've always been the calmer one," she continued. "The strong one. Please don't make this harder for her than it already is." I deleted the message without finishing it. That wasn't rebellion. It was release. The kind that doesn't come with fanfare or fire. Just a soft closing of a door you won't open again. I walked into my bedroom, pulled out the moleskin journal I hadn't touched in years. It was tucked behind the books I kept but didn't reread. Titles I clung to for identity, not relevance. I opened to a blank page and wrote one line. "When they disappear long enough, you start inventing reasons to make it hurt less." I stared at it. No edits. No second guesses. Then I folded the page back, pressed it flat, and slipped it under my phone. I wasn't sure what I needed it for, but I knew I wasn't done needing it yet. The journal was still on the nightstand the next morning, page folded neat under my phone like a warning I had written to myself. I left it there. By Wednesday afternoon, the office had taken on a strange sort of hush. Not silence exactly, but the kind of quiet that happens when people are pretending they didn't witness something awful. They spoke just loud enough to not be accused of whispering, but never directly to me. I walked into the kitchen, same time I always did, hoping my presence wouldn't register as an event. No one said anything, but I could feel the shift, the way people paused just a breath longer when I entered the room. I grabbed my container from the fridge, sat down at the corner table near the wall, and opened the lid like it mattered. There used to be another chair beside mine. Amy's. That seat was empty now, and this time, it wasn't just vacant. It was deliberately left alone, like no one wanted to be caught taking the place of someone who'd made the mistake of being decent. I took a bite of my salad, but the flavor sat flat on my tongue. I wasn't hungry. I was trying to hold on to routine, like routine could somehow rebuild dignity. That's when my phone buzzed with a Slack message. Amy. I shouldn't have said anything, it read. I just thought, you deserved better. Beneath it, a screenshot. Her dismissal notice, formal tone, signature from HR, the kind of language that softens a knife. Intern termination due to disruption of team hierarchy. No names were mentioned, but I knew who'd written it. Celeste didn't need to put her name on things. Her fingerprints were enough. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew if I said anything now, it might make things worse for her. She'd already done what no one else in that office dared. She said something. I closed the message and opened the shared folder where all internal memos were stored. Scrolling through, I found the official announcement. Amy Tollin's internship has ended. We thank her for her contributions. Contributions. That word stuck in my throat like a splinter. What contribution was that? Compassion? The room behind me buzzed with the soft noise of coffee brewing and casual cruelty. Someone laughed too loudly, like they needed to remind the room they weren't aligned with me. I closed my laptop. I needed air, but not outside. Just distance. Walking past the copy room, I overheard two coworkers at the printer. Why did she even get involved? One said. The words dropped like gum under a desk. It's not like she knew her long enough to get personal, the other answered. My steps didn't slow. I didn't spin around and demand decency. I didn't need to. The damage was already done. What mattered now was what I chose to do with it. Back at my desk, I opened the draft of the resignation email I'd been quietly tweaking since Monday. I read it once slowly. Then I hit delete. The decision wasn't dramatic. I didn't whisper, I'm staying. I just pressed backspace until it was gone. Later that afternoon, I stood in the elevator alone. The glass walls showed my reflection over the city, grayer now, shadowed by clouds that hadn't yet rained. For the first time in days, I looked at myself. Not my clothes, not my posture, not whether my cardigan made me look small, but at my face. I didn't see someone defeated. I saw someone still standing. The elevator reached the ground floor. I didn't step out. Instead, I pressed the button for the 14th floor, the executive wing. If speaking up gets someone fired, maybe it's time someone stops whispering. The elevator opened on the 14th floor, and I stepped out before I could talk myself out of it. No one stopped me. No one asked why I was up there. That's how silence works in places like this. It covers you just enough to look like permission. I moved past the row of glass offices, my heels quieter than my thoughts. Celeste's door was cracked open. She was on a call, her voice smooth and professional. Absolutely, we'll take the lead on that segment. Yes, I'll send it directly. She didn't see me until I was already inside. She finished her sentence and hung up without looking up. Do you need something? I shut the door behind me. There's a slide in the presentation you're sending to senior leadership, I said, keeping my voice even. Page 3, the predictive model. Celeste leaned back in her chair, finally meeting my eyes. Yes? It's mine. She tilted her head, that familiar false confusion crossing her face. Your name's not on it. Exactly. She offered a tight smile. Are we really doing this? You want to bicker over formatting credits? I took a slow breath. You took my work again. And this isn't about credit. It's about theft. It stops now. Her expression didn't change. Her voice dropped just slightly, lower than polite. You want a war now? With me? You'll lose, Mireya. You've always been softer than you think. I stepped forward, not out of anger, but out of certainty. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to let you know. If you keep signing your name on things that aren't yours, Someone will make sure the right names get seen. Celesta crossed her arms. You sound like you've been reading self-help books. No, I said. I've just been quiet long enough to recognize when someone mistakes silence for safety. I left her office before she could answer, the conversation unfinished, but not incomplete. That was the difference now. I didn't need her response. I needed my own boundary. Back at my desk, I opened the presentation. I scrolled to page 3 and stared at the model, mine, unchanged from the Excel sheet I built on a Sunday morning in my pajamas. I copied the file and dragged it into a folder labeled Originals. I didn't create it to prove a point. But now it would. That night, Joran was already home when I walked in, sitting on the couch with his laptop open. The living room was dim, warm with the amber glow of the floor lamp. He didn't ask how my day was. He closed the laptop and just looked at me. I sat down next to him, our shoulders barely touching. After a few minutes, I said, "Do you remember the library?" He smiled gently. "Which one? We practically lived there. The time I helped you prep for your stats exam, the night before your final." He let out a breath of a laugh. "You brought a highlighter in 3 colors, made me flashcards, and didn't say a word when I got every single question wrong the first round." I leaned my head back. "You told me something that night. You said, 'You make the world measurable, Mireya, but you never take space in it.'" His smile faded into something quieter. "I didn't mean it as a criticism." "I know," I said, "but it stuck." He reached over and took my hand, his grip warm, familiar. "When you're ready to stop being invisible, just tell me where to stand." There was no sentimentality in his voice, no pity, just a fact, simple as the ticking of the clock above the bookshelf. I nodded, and we didn't say anything else for a long time. Later that night, long after he had gone to bed, I opened my inbox and stared at the anonymous complaint draft I'd been writing since Monday. It detailed what happened in the meeting room, the brain-dead remark, the stolen credit, the intern who was terminated for showing basic decency, all of it. I hovered over send, and then I closed the draft, not because I was letting it go, but because I didn't want to send it anonymously anymore. If I was going to speak, it wouldn't be in whispers. Sometimes, choosing not to whisper is the loudest thing you can do. Friday morning came with a polished edge, sky cloudless, air still, like the city was holding its breath. At 8:57, I sat quietly in the back row of the main conference room, legs crossed, notebook on my lap, pen untouched. Celesta stood at the front, hands perfectly poised on either side of the podium. She was in her element, charismatic, commanding, carefully rehearsed. Her voice echoed off the glass and metal like it belonged to someone who had never been questioned. "Today's alignment session," she began, "is about culture and accountability. The kind of culture that supports innovation, resilience, and yes, excellence." The word hung in the air, rehearsed and hollow. She clicked to the first slide. Bold text, vague goals, team empowerment, vision-driven collaboration. A collection of safe phrases that meant nothing and said less. The second slide appeared, then the third. I knew that third slide. I'd built it. Every data point, every visual, every label, mine. And under it, her name. She didn't credit anyone else. Not me, not the team, just her. I waited. Slide 5. Something shifted. The screen froze for a second, flickered, then jumped to a different image entirely. A paused video frame. Grainy, slightly tilted. Celesta's face, mid-sentence. Her mouth forming words I knew too well. The room fell still. Not quiet, still, like it couldn't breathe. Then the video played. "This isn't a TED Talk. Are you brain dead?" The audio was clear. My voice followed, barely audible. "I'll follow up with the report." Laughter. The kind that stings because it's real. In the room now, chairs creaked. Someone coughed. No one moved. Celesta looked at the screen, then down at the remote. She clicked. Nothing changed. Clicked again. Still frozen on her face, her voice repeating like an accusation. One more click. Harder. Still nothing. She turned toward the IT manager in the corner. Kill the feed. He hesitated. It's embedded, not a live stream. At the back of the room, I stood. All eyes turned. The clip is real, I said, voice steady. The context is worse. I walked forward slowly, the only movement in a room full of frozen bodies. This wasn't a one-time comment, I said. It wasn't a joke taken out of context. This has been the standard here, for people who don't look the part, who don't speak loud enough, who aren't in the right circle. I stopped in front of the projector. I didn't need the screen anymore. It's a culture, and it ends today. No shouting, no shaking, just a line in the sand, and my name signed under it. After the meeting, I returned to my desk. The air in the office wasn't heavy now. It was sharp. Not because I'd changed, but because I'd made it impossible for everyone else not to. At 1:36 p.m., an email from HR hit the entire company. Subject: Internal investigation initiated. Workplace culture review. I opened it. Read it twice. Then closed it and opened my drafts folder. The same complaint I had once considered sending anonymously? No longer needed. Instead, I clicked Compose, attached the clip, typed my full name, and hit send. Not to HR. To the board. By 2:05, I could feel the ripple. People moving differently. Conversations cut short when I walked by. A few stares I didn't meet. At 2:47, a colleague leaned toward my desk, the one who never said a word before. "You just declared war," he said. I looked up from my keyboard. "No, I just stopped playing dead." Later that afternoon, I passed Celesta in the hallway outside HR. Her posture wasn't crisp anymore. Her eyes darted. Her voice had a sharpness that no longer landed. "I need to speak to the board," she said to the HR director. "There's a process," they replied, carefully neutral. Celesta's jaw twitched. "This is absurd. She's manipulating everything. This is personal." I didn't stop walking. I passed her like she was someone I used to know. She didn't see me anymore, not as someone to ignore, but as someone she couldn't erase. I kept walking after passing Celesta in the hallway, my eyes locked on the elevator doors at the far end. She didn't follow, and I didn't look back. Some goodbyes don't need words. They happen in the space between one glance and the absence of another. An hour later, I sat in the smaller of two conference rooms, prepping for a leadership review with senior analytics. It wasn't supposed to be formal, just an overview of upcoming model changes and projected ad spending. But when I opened the shared presentation on the company server, my hands stilled on the trackpad. The formatting was off. The font was different. The structure, gutted. Celesta had gone into the file sometime overnight. She'd stripped the core slides, the core logic, and inserted out-of-date projections with flawed visualizations. Not outright sabotage. No, just enough to make it look like I didn't know my own work. A few minutes later, I walked into the senior leadership meeting, knowing exactly what she'd done, and I chose to present it anyway. The projector glitched 3 times in the first 5 minutes. The graphs didn't match the talking points. The numbers contradicted the previous campaign's performance. I kept going. Celesta sat near the head of the table, arms crossed, tapping her nail on the side of her tumbler. She didn't have to smirk. Her silence did the heavy lifting. When I finished, I didn't apologize. I didn't make excuses. I closed my laptop, thanked everyone for their time, and returned to my desk. By the time I sat down, a new message had popped up in my inbox. From Joren. Subject: Eyes are opening body. Check the thread below, quietly. It was a forwarded email chain from the board of directors. No greetings, no exclamation points. Just a subject line. Leadership Ethics Inquiry. Pending acquisition impact. One director had written, "Should we discuss internal ethics breaches before finalizing the control shift?" Another replied, "Celesta Drine's most recent submission included data plagiarized from the analytics team, attached for review." Then, finally, We're proceeding with the acquisition, but any unresolved personnel conflicts must be addressed immediately. I stared at the screen. Not with glee, not with revenge in my chest, just relief. They saw it. She hadn't fooled them. At 3:42 p.m., we were called back to the HR floor for a compliance review. No context given. The room was tense when I entered. Executives, HR leads, and someone from the legal team. Before anyone spoke, the door opened one last time. Joren stepped in. Not as my husband, but as the majority stakeholder. He didn't sit next to me. He sat across from Celesta. Her posture faltered, her breath caught. She looked at him like she was trying to rewrite the past with a glance. But Joren didn't look at her. He looked at the HR lead. "I'm here to observe only," he said, "but I'd like to note for the record, internal ethics concerns have reached my desk. I trust they're being taken seriously." Celesta didn't speak. No one needed her to. After the meeting, I stood near the window in the executive hallway. The skyline stretched beyond the glass, the city blinking like it was winking at me for the first time. HR sent out a company-wide update 2 hours later. Pending further investigation into recent leadership conduct, several department heads will be placed on administrative leave effective immediately. Celesta's name was at the top. I watched her walk out of her office. She wasn't escorted. They didn't need to. The weight of exposure does its own escorting. As she passed by the rest of the team, she caught Deirdre's eye, her most loyal shadow. Deirdre stood. "You told us she was weak," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "Turns out she just outlasted you." Celesta turned to me as she reached the elevator. "This was yours, wasn't it?" she asked. I didn't blink. "No," I said. "You built this. I just stopped covering for you." The elevator closed. The fall was hers. The silence was mine, until now. The boardroom lights had been dimmed to a soft glow. The only sound in the room, the quiet rustle of paper as contracts were stacked, initialed, and passed across the table. No more voices, no more defenses, just signatures and consequences. I sat near the far end, next to the Assistant General Counsel. My role wasn't formal. I wasn't there as an executive or a plaintiff. I was there as a witness. That felt important to me. I didn't come to demand anything. I came to see it finished. Joren stood, tall and understated, in a slate gray blazer and a quiet sort of resolve that didn't need to be loud to be respected. "I'll keep this brief," he said, turning toward the board. "I'm not interested in micromanaging the culture of a company I didn't build, but I won't fund a system that rewards silence and punishes character. Respect isn't a bonus. It's part of the cost." No one said a word. He signed the final document and passed it back to legal. Control of Aurora Creative was his now. Celesta, seated across the table, didn't look up. Her silence wasn't unfamiliar, but this time it wasn't calculated. It was surrender. HR followed with their own announcement. Effective immediately, Celesta would be placed on administrative leave pending completion of the internal investigation. She offered no objection. Her chair creaked as she pushed back from the table and left the room. I didn't watch her go. Instead, I stood, walked calmly to her office, and paused in the doorway. It was still pristine. No personal photos, no clutter, just the same artificial orchid in the corner and the faint scent of her citrus lotion lingering in the air. I stepped in and laid the envelope on her desk. Handwritten, just a few lines. "I stayed silent for years to protect your name. I won't protect what you became." That was it. I left the envelope there and placed a printed copy in HR's file cabinet, not for protection, but so the record would match the truth. On my way back to my desk, the HR manager caught up with me. "The board would like to offer you a role in restructuring analytics leadership." I didn't flinch. "I appreciate it," I said, "but I didn't do this to move up. I did it so no one else has to move out of the way." She looked at me curiously. "Is there anything you want?" I paused. Yes. Start a task force, something real, with teeth, ethics, reporting, training, named after someone no one expected to be strong. The Mireya Initiative? No. I shook my head. The Carter Program. My grandmother taught ESL classes for free out of her garage. She didn't have a title. She just believed everyone deserved to be heard. She nodded, quietly taking a note. We can make that happen. Back at my desk, I pulled out the book I'd been keeping in the drawer. Leadership in Crisis, The Ethics of Action. I'd highlighted a line weeks ago, not knowing I'd come back to it now. Silence doesn't absolve you, it just delays your consequence. I tore the page out gently and left it folded on my keyboard. I packed slowly. No rush, no dramatics. I didn't even take the plant I'd kept on my windowsill. Just a framed picture of my grandmother and a thumb drive. In the lobby, I passed by people who had never spoken to me, never learned my name. They didn't say anything now either, but 3 of them stood up. They didn't clap. They didn't smile. They just stood and watched me leave. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their memory of me to be kind. I just needed it to be accurate. I didn't need them to remember me. I needed them to remember what silence costs. 1 week later, I stood barefoot in my kitchen, the kettle hissing behind me. The hush in the house was different now. No longer heavy, just honest. It didn't press against me like it used to. It simply existed. The cardboard box with my name still sat by the entryway, half unpacked. I hadn't rushed. I hadn't needed to. Leaving didn't mean escaping. It meant I'd finally stopped waiting for someone else to give me permission. I walked to the kitchen table and saw the small envelope that had arrived earlier that morning. No return address, no logo. Just my name, handwritten in simple print. I sat down, peeled it open, and unfolded a single sheet of paper. Mireya. I saw it all and said nothing. I'm sorry. Deirdre. That was it. There was no apology for believing Celesta. No justification. Just that. 4 lines that held more weight than any boardroom statement ever could. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't call her. I didn't write back. But I didn't throw it away either. I stood, walked into the hallway, and slid it into a drawer I'd labeled years ago. Keep, don't forget. That drawer held a handful of things. A copy of my first job offer. A photo of my grandmother teaching English in her garage. A news clipping about the campaign I built but never got credit for. I didn't keep them to dwell. I kept them because I'd learned that memory without context is how people get rewritten. Late that afternoon, sunlight poured in through the living room window, low and golden. I passed by the mantel and paused in front of an old photo. Me and Celesta, maybe 9 and 13, covered in dirt, laughing like girls who hadn't learned yet that even bloodlines carry hierarchy. I picked it up, held it, and after a moment, slid it just behind a half-burned candle. Not out of frame, but not front and center anymore either. That evening, I arrived at a small community center near the edge of Lake Harriet. The sign outside was simple. Back to work. Digital skills for women over 40. Inside, 8 women sat around a scratched wooden table, their laptops open, notebooks ready. Most of them had never worked in tech. A few hadn't worked outside the home in decades. All of them looked slightly unsure they belonged. I smiled and started with the basics. Data hygiene, browser extensions, Google Sheets. No one interrupted me. No one called me sweetheart. Halfway through the session, one woman raised her hand. So, where did you used to work? I paused for a beat, then smiled. I was in analytics, I said, at a place that taught me everything about systems and how they break. She nodded, scribbled something down, and didn't press further. When class ended, they lingered. Some asked questions. Others just thanked me quietly and gathered their things. I packed up slowly, glancing once at the whiteboard before turning off the lights. Outside, the sun had nearly disappeared behind the trees. I tucked my hands into my coat pockets and took the path along the lake, where the breeze stirred just enough to remind me it was almost November. About halfway through my loop, I saw him. Joren was seated at our usual bench, hands folded, gaze on the water. He looked up as I approached, but didn't speak. I sat beside him. The air between us was comfortable, unhurried. After a few quiet moments, he said, "Does it feel like enough?" I thought about it. The meetings, the letters, the video, the silence, the standing. "No," I said, "but it feels like mine." He nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. The sky had turned violet and copper, mirrored on the surface of the lake like it, too, had something it was learning to let go of. We didn't say much after that. Some bruises don't fade, but they stop dictating how you walk. And if you're still here, listening, reflecting, then maybe you've walked through a version of this story yourself. Maybe you've been underestimated, overlooked, or told in 100 quiet ways that you didn't belong at the table you helped build. What I've learned is this: you don't always get the apology. You won't always get the audience. But you can always choose how you carry your voice. And sometimes, reclaiming your space doesn't mean shouting. It just means not shrinking anymore. I didn't want revenge. I wanted my name back, my dignity back, my voice. And I got it. Not because someone handed it to me, but because I stopped whispering. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, and later realized it only protected the wrong person? Or maybe you were the one who watched in silence, unsure whether to speak. Either way, your story matters. Your turning point may not look like mine, but it's real, and it's yours to tell when you're ready. Let me know in the comments. Have you ever been in Mireya's shoes, or Deirdre's? If this story resonated with you, drop a 1 in the comments, or just tell me where you're watching from. I truly want to hear from you. If you didn't connect with the story, tell me why. What would have made it hit closer to home? Feedback helps me grow, and I'm here to listen. And finally, if you believe in the power of quiet strength, in stories that honor dignity over drama, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your voice, your presence, it's what keeps these stories alive. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Until then, stay grounded, stay kind, and never mistake silence for surrender. Hi, I'm Catelyn. They used to call me the family failure, not in private, but into a microphone during a toast. A room full of people clapped while my sister smiled like it was a joke. But the man she planned to marry? He turned to me and said, "Thank you," because I was the one who paid for the venue. The one who built the company he worked for. The one she never mentioned. She left my name off the program, off the slideshow, off the list. But why did she erase me? While living in my home, using my money, wearing my clothes? Was I really the failure? Or just the part of her story she couldn't control? And if I never said a word, how did the truth get so loud? They didn't look up when I walked in. Not one face turned toward me, not even a flicker of recognition. I stood for a moment just inside the gate, hands loosely folded in front of me, watching laughter bounce off plastic chairs and paper plates, stacked with deviled eggs and store-bought pie. The Carmody family reunion brunch, 3rd Sunday of May, rain or shine. And I was invisible. Delilah was perched on a patio stool, legs crossed, drink in hand, talking to a woman in a cobalt dress with a southern drawl thick as molasses. I heard her giggle, effortless, polished. Then the woman asked, "So, did your sister make it?" Delilah didn't miss a beat. "Oh, it's just me today," she said, her voice light, keeping it simple. I looked down at the lemon bars I'd baked the night before, no box mix, and walked them to the folding table near the edge of the yard. I slid them between a tray of Costco pinwheels and some sad-looking celery sticks. No one noticed. Not even Aunt Sharon, who once told me lemon reminded her of her first kiss behind the church after choir practice. I poured myself a weak iced tea, skipped the sugar, and found an empty lawn chair in the shade. The sun was relentless on the others, but no one joined me. I didn't expect them to. The conversations kept circling around Delilah. Her wedding plans, her designer, her bachelorette trip to Aspen. She floated through the backyard like a well-rehearsed hostess, never needing to stop and listen because the story was always about her. That was her gift, shaping a moment around herself so tightly there wasn't space left for anyone else. Across the lawn, a man in khakis and boat shoes approached her. "I heard you have a sister. She's in consulting?" he asked. Delilah tilted her head like she was pondering a grocery list. "I mean, I had a sister who did odd jobs. Data something. Freelance, I think. Nothing serious." Someone at the table laughed and muttered, "Every family has a wild card." They laughed harder at that one. No one looked my way. I lifted my glass, took a small sip, and let the ice clink quietly. I wasn't angry. Not really. That would have implied I expected different. What I felt was older than anger, closer to that dull ache you get when you've been sitting wrong too long and your body forgets comfort was ever an option. I remembered the time I paid off our cousin Joe's mortgage after he lost his job. Quietly, no paper trail. They held a backyard BBQ in his honor a month later. Delilah gave a speech. She thanked everyone who pitched in. My name never came up. I remembered when Delilah moved into my condo for a month or two after her PR firm folded. That was 11 months ago. She still had my spare key, still used my guest towels. But in this yard, in this story, I didn't exist. From my seat beneath the tree, I watched Everett, her fiancé, flip burgers beside Uncle Rich. He seemed decent, kind eyes, clean laugh. He didn't know, not yet. 3 months ago, Delilah had asked for help covering the deposit on her venue. "Just until my refund from the planner comes in," she'd said, breezy and confident. I transferred the funds that afternoon, quietly, no questions, no conditions. I signed the check with my business name, R. Cruz Consulting. She didn't ask what the R stood for. She never has. Back in the present, I noticed the ring on her finger catching the sunlight as she adjusted her hair. Everett leaned over and whispered something into her ear. She beamed like she invented joy. I took a slow breath. That man raising a toast with her smile doesn't know I built the stage they're standing on. Everett raised his glass, smiling like he had everything figured out. I let mine sit untouched, the condensation dripping slowly along the sides, as if even the glass knew not to try too hard to be seen. Later that night, I slipped off my shoes at the door and stepped into my condo. The quiet was a relief. The kind you only get after you've held your breath through a whole afternoon without even noticing. I padded into the kitchen, dropped my keys in the bowl near the sink, and spotted 2 strangers at the island bar, laughing with Delilah like old friends. "Catelyn, you're back!" she sang out. Still in her silk robe, hair in loose waves like she'd just walked off a set. "We were just finishing the last of that cab you brought back from Napa. Hope that's okay." It wasn't a question. One of the men turned. "Oh, you must be her roommate," he said, eyes still on Delilah. "You guys have a great place." She smiled. "We make it work. She's between contracts right now, trying to find her next step." That word, between, hung in the air like a flicked knife. Deliberate, surgical, unnecessary. I didn't correct her. I just walked past the empty bottle, grabbed a can of sparkling water, and retreated to my room. I closed the door quietly behind me and sat on the edge of the bed, gripping the cold aluminum like it might keep me from saying what I wouldn't take back. It was always like this. Public play, private silence. She knew the truth, that I owned the apartment, that I ran a firm with international clients, that the wine she poured had been charged to my business card without asking, but the game was always better when you could convince others they were watching a rising star and her shadow, not the other way around. An hour or so later, I headed back out to grab something from the laundry and crossed paths with Ms. Hensley, the older woman who cleaned the floor twice a week. Her back was slightly bent, but she always stood tall when she spoke. "Your sister's got such good taste," she said warmly, nodding toward the front door. "She's lucky to live in a place like this." I opened my mouth, then closed it. It wasn't worth it. I just smiled. She is, I said. I walked past her, rounded the corner, and leaned against the hallway wall for a moment. That line, "She's lucky," stuck with me. Not because Miss Hensley was wrong, but because she was right. Delilah was lucky. She had a good address, matching furniture, and a sister who kept her mouth shut. That was worth more than square footage. After the guests left and the lights dimmed, I sat at the kitchen counter with my laptop open. Lease agreement, property taxes, utility accounts. Everything was in my name. She'd never even chipped in for toilet paper, much less rent. I clicked over to my banking app, saw another charge from Instacart. 2 bottles of imported wine, $76. Charged to the shared card. My card. No text. No note. She had been supposed to stay for a month. To regroup after losing her job. It had been 11 months. I leaned back, staring at the screen, and thought about all the things I didn't say. The moments I let slide. The times I bit my tongue so hard it bruised my own sense of self. The next morning, I woke up early. No reason, just couldn't sleep. I brewed coffee, poured 1 cup, and left a note on the fridge. Plain white paper, neat handwriting. Monthly contributions are due by the 5th. Let me know if you need the Zelle info. That was it. No smiley face, no signature. Just a small, quiet line in the sand. She came into the kitchen around 10, yawning, stretching like a cat who owned the place. She read the note, blinked once, then turned to me and grinned. "Well," she said, voice sugar slick, "somebody woke up with a business hat on." I didn't respond. She smirked, pulled open the fridge, and grabbed a peach. "You know, Kat, not everything's about invoices and line items." I watched her leave the room, still chewing, like nothing had shifted. But it had. After she walked away from the fridge with that smug little grin, I sat back down at my desk and opened my laptop. Not to work, but to breathe. The kind of breathing that slows you down before you say something that burns bridges with gasoline. I didn't need that. I just needed space. 3 days passed without much exchange between us, which was a mercy. Then, out of nowhere, Everett popped into my office between meetings. "You know, we're doing the final walkthrough Friday," he said, half spinning the chair beside me. "You should come by the venue, see how it all turned out. You helped pull this off." I looked at him over my glasses. "I don't think I'm on the guest list," he chuckled. "Stop. You're practically the reason it's happening." I didn't push it. There was no point. I knew Delilah hadn't mentioned me. She never did. Not in public, not when it counted. I just nodded and murmured, "I'll think about it." That Friday, I showed up. Quietly. No RSVP. No one stopped me at the door. The rooftop was stunning. Strings of soft lights crisscrossing overhead. A spread of catered dishes laid out like an art exhibit, and jazz humming from hidden speakers. I wore a simple black dress, clean lines, nothing flashy. I walked in, poured myself a glass of champagne, and stood by the railing as the sun dipped behind the skyline. People were talking, old classmates, family friends, clients Delilah once advised. But I had cleaned up after. A few recognized me from business articles, offered polite smiles. Most didn't know me at all. That was fine. Delilah saw me about 20 minutes in. Her eyes widened like she'd seen a ghost. She mouthed something I didn't bother decoding, some version of, "Why are you here?" I raised my glass slightly and turned away. She didn't approach. An hour later, she clinked her glass. A hush fell. She stepped onto the small platform near the garden wall, wearing a deep burgundy gown and that spotlight-ready smile. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "This day means everything to Everett and me, and I just want to take a moment to recognize those who've helped us become who we are." She listed names, family members, former mentors, her favorite yoga instructor. Then, her tone changed. "And to those who didn't always understand the path I was on, thank you too. You reminded me what I didn't want to become. Failure teaches, if we're smart enough to learn. Some of us learn quicker than others." The laughter was soft, polite. No one looked at me, but I felt the air shift. She glanced in my direction. Barely. Like I was just part of the furniture. I stood there, still. I didn't blink. I didn't shift my weight or look away. I just sipped my drink, slow and steady, and waited for her to finish. When the music returned, people clapped and resumed chatting like nothing had happened. Everett made his way toward me, weaving through the crowd. He handed me a fresh drink and said gently, "That part about failure, she wasn't talking about you, right?" I let a beat pass. "I didn't realize I was famous enough to be a metaphor," I said, letting the corner of my mouth curl, just slightly. He looked down at his glass. "She shouldn't have said that." "She said exactly what she meant to say," I replied. I turned and looked out over the skyline. My name was never going to be mentioned, not in her speeches, not on her invitations, not on the plaque outside that venue. But I was there. I had built pieces of this night that she couldn't erase, even if she tried. There are moments where silence keeps you safe, keeps things from exploding, keeps you from becoming the villain in someone else's story. But that kind of safety starts to feel like surrender, and I wasn't sure I wanted to be quiet anymore. The wind had picked up that evening after the toast. I stood for a long moment by the railing, glass still in hand, as people moved on with drinks and small talk like nothing had just been said. By the time I got back to my car, the air felt heavier than before. Charlotte's kind of humid, like the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. 2 hours before that, I had walked into the venue's lobby and politely gave my name to the young woman at the check-in table. She scrolled through her tablet, then looked back up. "I'm sorry," she said, forcing a professional smile. "I don't see you on the list. Are you with one of the vendors?" "No," I answered calmly, pulling a folded piece of paper from my clutch. "I'm not on the guest list, but I paid the deposit." She hesitated, scanned the document, receipt, contract, wire details. Her eyes flicked to the signature, R. Cruz. "Ah, right. Of course. Please come in. I'll make a note." She didn't look me in the eye after that. I didn't take it personally. Once inside, I walked past a long table, dressed in white linens and adorned with silver-framed thank you cards. "Special thanks to our sponsors," one banner read. At the top, in bold font, the Carmody Keene Foundation. I blinked. There was no foundation. It was something Delilah had invented to look official. A shell name, backdated with a logo she probably made in Canva. I scanned the names below. Businesses, a boutique gym she used to work with. Not one mention of R. Cruz Consulting. Not even small print. Not a single syllable. I stepped to the side, opened my phone, and pulled up the confirmation email from the venue. The receipt, the account transfer, the initials. It was all there. I'd kept it organized, not because I needed credit, but because credit was how you tracked what you had lost. She didn't just erase me, she replaced me, with a fiction that looked better on paper. Back at the condo, 2 weeks before the event, I had received a letter. Real envelope, stamped, handwritten. It came from a shelter I had donated to privately the month prior, after they reached out during a funding emergency. Delilah had been the one to grab the mail that morning. I hadn't thought twice about it. That evening, I saw the envelope, opened, wrinkled, tossed in the trash under a pizza box. I pulled it out. The letter inside was short but sincere. "Your generosity helped keep 27 women safe this month. Thank you for believing in second chances." No signature, no public shout-out. Just paper. Honest paper. She never said a word about it. I never asked. The morning after the party, I came home early. I didn't expect to see her up yet, but there she was, sprawled across the sectional in leggings and a hoodie, phone in hand, scrolling. The smell of lavender body spray still clung to the hallway. "Morning," she said, eyes never leaving her screen. I walked past her, straight into my office, shut the door, sat down. There was no need for confrontation. I had no interest in another performance. I logged into my accounting software and created a new folder, Household. Inside it, I opened a blank invoice. Line item, guest rent, utilities, grocery reimbursement. Client, Delilah Carmody. Payment terms: due the 5th of each month. Delivery: Zelle or check. I hit save as recurring, leaned back, and stared at the screen. If she wanted to treat this like a partnership, we'd do it the right way. From here on out, every cost would come with a receipt. I heard her laugh from the living room, loud and fake, likely some reality show echoing off the walls. But I didn't feel like correcting anything anymore. It wasn't that I wanted distance, it was that I no longer wanted distortion. And people like Delilah thrived on distortion. They needed a flexible version of truth they could sculpt to fit their stories. Mine had bones. Mine held weight. That morning, as she left to run errands in my car, I watched from the window. Then I opened my email and began drafting a lease agreement with her name on it. We were going to do this by the book. After sending that lease draft, I closed my laptop, got dressed for work, and took the long way to the office. I didn't want to arrive before Everett. I wanted to walk in right after him, not out of strategy, but because I was tired of being early for people who never noticed. We hadn't spoken since the party. His texts were brief, mostly logistics, no emojis, no, "Hey, how are you?" I didn't expect much, but I could feel the shift. Something about the way he had looked at me that night, glass in hand, jaw clenched. He wasn't just embarrassed. He was questioning everything. By mid-morning, we had our usual Monday strategy touch point. He walked in holding 2 coffees, set one on my desk without a word, and sat across from me. I opened the quarterly projections. We got through the first few agenda items like nothing was different. He was focused, but less performative than usual, like he wasn't trying to impress anymore. Then he saw it. He flipped to the next slide and froze, eyes locked on the signature line at the bottom of a pitch deck I'd finalized over the weekend. R. Cruz, founder, R. Curve Strategies. He blinked. Wait, that's you? That's... I looked up slowly. Yes? He leaned back. I didn't realize that's what the R stood for. No one ever asks. He let out a quiet exhale, almost a laugh, the kind you use when something suddenly clicks and you're not sure if you feel enlightened or stupid. So, I've been working for the family failure. You've been working with her, I corrected. There's a difference. He didn't smile, but he nodded. A few minutes passed before either of us spoke again. Then he cleared his throat and said, "That time you helped me recover that DEI account, remember how I was about to pull the whole proposal?" I nodded once. "Well, your feedback saved it. That account pays half my team's salaries now. I've told that story to 5 other execs. But I told it like it was my idea." I didn't respond. He looked down, almost embarrassed. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about who you are, what you do?" "Because nobody ever listened when I wasn't holding a microphone." He nodded again, slower this time. I saw it land. The next afternoon, Everett sat in on the final video review with the production company that had handled the party. I wasn't there, but Tilda, the lead editor, messaged me later with something odd. "Hey," she wrote, "this might be nothing, but Everett got weird when he saw a spot was missing in the slideshow. Thought you should know." When I followed up, she called me directly. "Okay, so, you remember that baby photo? The one of Delilah in the kitchen, with you in the background, both covered in flour?" I did. I hated that photo, but Mom had loved it. It used to sit on her piano. Well, it was in the first draft of the slideshow. Everett saw it, liked it. But a day before final delivery, Delilah said it didn't match the aesthetic and told us to remove it. She didn't say it was you in the photo, just that it cluttered the visual flow. Of course she did. That night, back home, I sat on the balcony with my laptop on my knees. The city buzzed beneath me like a distant engine, white noise for a brain that wouldn't turn off. I pulled up my text thread with Delilah. Then I typed, "Don't speak for me again, especially not on a stage you didn't pay for." She replied 20 minutes later with a laughing gif, the kind that winks like it's in on some secret you'll never be part of. I didn't respond. Instead, I stared at the message and thought about how long I'd let her run the show. Let her craft the narrative. Let her cut pieces out of my life. Photos, names, facts. Because they didn't match the version she wanted to present. Some people confuse quiet with weakness. They think it means you're retreating. But retreat isn't surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. And I was done being the ghost in her success story. By Monday afternoon, the weight in my chest had settled into something sharper. Not grief, not anger, just clarity. I'd moved past waiting, past hoping. Now I was observing, collecting, filing it all like evidence in a case I didn't need to argue. Not anymore. That Sunday, while sipping coffee at my desk, I was reviewing engagement metrics for a marketing client when something odd caught my eye. A sponsored post from a new account had gone semi-viral overnight. The profile photo was generic, just a cropped image of pink tulips. But the caption? Delilah Carmody is the kind of woman other women aspire to be. Grace under pressure, vision beyond the ordinary. Watching her lead was the highlight of my year. My jaw tightened. It was written like a press release. The hashtags were even more precise. Leadership goals, unstoppable bride, cheer power moves. I switched tabs, ran a quick IP trace through our analytics software. It wasn't advanced surveillance. It was just a tool we used to flag bot accounts and track influencer campaigns. The post had been written from our apartment, from my Wi-Fi. She wrote her own tribute. To herself. I leaned back in my chair. No surprise. Just confirmation. I should have felt disgusted, but mostly what I felt was sad. For both of us. That she needed to be admired so badly, she was willing to manufacture it, and that I had once tried to earn that admiration for real. I didn't bring it up. I let it sit. That night, around 11:15, I was brushing my teeth when my phone buzzed on the counter. A long text preview appeared. It was from Delilah. Not to me. At least, not intentionally. Once this wedding's over, she's gone. I'm done pretending she's useful. Tired of babying her ego. It's time she learns how to fend for herself. No emoji. No punctuation. Just cold. I stared at it for a moment. Then I wiped my hands, opened the message, and hit forward. Recipient. Everett Keene. No comment. No explanation. Just the raw text, delivered as is. Then I turned off my phone and went to bed. The next morning, the sun came in early and strong. I padded into the kitchen, brewed a pot of coffee, and waited. Delilah eventually appeared in her usual athleisure. Messy bun, yoga pants, smug aura. "Did you finish the almond milk?" she asked, opening the fridge. "I did." She shrugged. "You could have picked some up." I poured my coffee, sat at the counter, and finally looked at her. "The thing about pretending someone's useless," I said quietly, "is you'd better hope they never stop being useful to you." She blinked, caught off guard, then laughed like she always did when she didn't have a real answer. "You're being dramatic." "No," I said, still calm. "I'm being done." I left the room. She didn't follow. Later that day, Everett knocked gently on the frame of my office door. No meeting scheduled, no pretext. Just him, looking like a man who had finally stopped doubting his instincts. He walked in, sat down, and folded his hands in his lap. "She never told me you were sisters," he said quietly. I didn't reply. "She told people she built this life, that she created something from nothing, that you were a distant relative, not who you are." I exhaled slowly. "She created the story. I just paid the invoice." He nodded. "You've been helping her this whole time, haven't you?" "She's been standing on ground," I poured, but she never once looked down. There was silence, but it wasn't awkward. It was acknowledgement. A moment where the room adjusted its shape, not to make me bigger, but to make the truth visible. He looked at me, eyes clear now. "You should be the one speaking next weekend, not her." I tilted my head slightly. "What makes you think I want the mic?" "Because you're the one who earned it." I didn't answer him right away. I just leaned back in my chair and looked at him, really looked at him. Not as my sister's fiancé, not as my employee, but as a man who had finally learned how to sit with the truth. By the end of the week, I got the email confirming my place on the agenda. The subject line was bland. Speaker confirmation, culture and integrity panel, but the name next to mine wasn't. It was hers, Delilah Carmody. Still listed as co-host. Saturday came too fast. I'd ironed my blouse twice, not because it needed it, but because I didn't want to look like I'd tried too hard. I arrived 15 minutes early, walked past the valet, past the branded welcome wall, and into the sleek, glass-walled lobby of Everett's firm like I'd been there all my life. Because I had. Just never from the front entrance. The room was buzzing with executives and clients. I took my seat at a round table near the front, half listening to opening remarks, until Everett stood up. He straightened his blazer, tapped the mic gently, and began. Leadership, he said, isn't just about showing up when the cameras are rolling. It's about the people who hold things together before anyone's watching. He thanked the board, the team, even the interns. Then his voice dropped just slightly. And most of all, he continued, to the woman who shaped how I lead, how I listen, and how I choose to grow, Catlin Cruz. The room paused. Actual honest silence. She's the one who made this platform possible. She's the one who reminded me that real builders rarely take the stage. But they should. People clapped. Not out of obligation, not politely. It felt earned. Across the room, Delilah was frozen in place. She clapped too, 2 beats late. Her mouth smiled, but her eyes didn't. After the panel, during the cocktail hour, people started approaching me. Strangers, senior partners. A woman in a navy wrap dress from New York came up first. So, tell me, she said, swirling her drink, why weren't you listed as co-host for the engagement event? I heard you funded most of it. I blinked. I did, I said simply. She laughed gently, not unkind. Well, that's a narrative adjustment waiting to happen. Another voice chimed in. A man from Boston I'd met once at a tech summit. Didn't you also design that Q3 rollout Everett keeps bragging about? Before I could answer, someone else leaned in. She's always been quiet, but you know what they say. It's the quiet ones who run the room. Delilah was nearby, trying to insert herself into other conversations, her laugh louder than necessary, eyes darting like she was trying to track too many things at once. She's very private, she finally offered when someone asked about me. Not into attention. But by then, the room had shifted. Eyes turned when I spoke. People nodded when I made a point. The story she had crafted for years was crumbling under its own weight. Later that evening, just outside the coat check, she caught me in the hallway. We need to talk, she said, brushing past a couple waiting for their Uber. I didn't flinch. No, Delilah, we don't. She grabbed my arm lightly. You blindsided me. This isn't my fight anymore, I replied. The truth is, doing just fine without me. Her jaw clenched. I'm going to clarify everything, set the record straight. Then start, I said, meeting her gaze. Start by telling them who paid the florist. She blinked. Just once, then let go. The next morning, I walked into the office early. The cleaning crew was still finishing up, vacuum humming low in the hallway. I stopped outside the boardroom. There, freshly mounted, was a new brass nameplate, Catlin Cruz, Executive Advisor to Global Strategy. It wasn't loud, it wasn't spotlighted, but it was solid, permanent. I stepped inside, flipped through the minutes from last quarter, and marked a few corrections. They were finally saying my name. But I had stopped waiting to hear it. By that Friday night, the story had traveled without me. I didn't need to correct anything, didn't need to press send. It was already unraveling, thread by careful thread. I found out about the engagement ending not from Delilah, but from Everett, through a brief, formal, company-wide notice that stated he would no longer be moving forward with personal obligations previously announced. polished, vague. But if you knew, you knew. The part he didn't say publicly came in a text that simply read, "You were right. I should have seen it sooner." I didn't reply. Later that evening, while reviewing a vendor contract at home, I heard the unmistakable thud of her keys hitting the entryway table. She hadn't texted to say she was coming back, just walked in like nothing had shifted, like she still had a right to the quiet air between our walls. "You won," she said flatly, setting her bag on the chair. "I wasn't playing," I answered, eyes still on the document. "You cost me everything." "No," I said, meeting her gaze now. "You gave it up the moment you thought the illusion was more valuable than the truth." She left again, slamming the door, not for dramatic effect, but because even she knew there was no clever line left to deliver. The following Monday, IT flagged an internal concern during a routine compliance audit. An email had been sent from my credentials to one of our largest clients nearly 6 months prior, declining a renewal. A $200,000 account lost. I reviewed the logs in silence. The timestamp, the device ID, the location metadata. It wasn't just a mistake. It was done from our apartment, from her laptop, when I was in New York at a speaking engagement. I said nothing, no HR report, no confrontation. I scheduled a call with the client, apologized for the miscommunication, sent a revised proposal within 24 hours. I CC'd Everett, finance, legal, all professional, all traceable. Then, I walked into the boardroom that Thursday morning, mid-quarter review already underway, and opened the backup documentation. "This," I said calmly, "is how we lost Dervon and Briggs. It won't happen again." No one argued. They just nodded. That evening, I returned home early. The building was quiet, early dusk settling over the skyline. I walked down the hallway, badge still warm in my hand from the office scan. As I approached our unit, I saw the keycard reader blink red. She was standing there, confused, jiggling the card like it might just be a tech glitch. I stepped around her, unlocked the door with my code, held it open. "You locked me out," she said, voice cracking for the first time in a long while. "No," I said simply. "I ended the lease. You didn't sign the new one." She stared at me, arms crossed tight against her chest. "I paid for your silence longer than I should have," I added. "Now it's time to earn your own voice." Behind the door sat a single duffel bag, packed neatly. Nothing spiteful, just final. She stepped inside, grabbed the handle, and turned back. "I was trying to protect us." "No," I said softly. "You were trying to preserve the version of you that didn't need me. But you always did." I didn't slam the door. I didn't need to. 2 days later, I was back in my office early, finishing prep for our expansion review with the European Partner Group. I had already archived the last financial document tied to her name, closed the tab, unlinked the account. The past wasn't gone. It was just no longer open. When my team arrived, I stood and greeted them with the kind of ease that comes from clarity, not control. "We're pivoting," I told them. "New structure, same standards. Let's move forward." The room nodded. I glanced at my screen one last time before the call began. Some exits don't need doors slamming. Just a quiet click, a decision, and no need to revisit it again. 3 years passed, not all at once, not in leaps or milestones, just slowly, steadily, like rain that erodes stone without ever announcing its presence. It passed in breaths, meetings, emails, and the way silence settles into your life after you stop trying to explain yourself to people who never really listened. I didn't plan to arrive where I am. Not exactly. But I'd built it, piece by piece, after everything burned down. Not in anger, just in necessity. When you're done fighting for recognition that won't come, you start building your own platform. Something that doesn't need applause to stand. Something that holds others up, too. That morning, I had just finished speaking at the Industry Leadership Forum in Boston. A room full of power suits and polished shoes, the kind of place that used to terrify me. Now, it didn't. Now, I owned my space in it. The applause I received wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Not performative. Not obligatory. I'd learned to tell the difference, and to value the kind that didn't need to shout to mean something. Backstage, someone pressed a bottle of water into my hand, murmured something about a media photo. I nodded, already half turned to leave, when I caught a glimpse, just a flicker, of movement near the far wall. She stood there. Delilah. No entourage, no crowd. Just her. She wore a visitor badge around her neck, the kind they give to Pulse Ones and quiet observers. She didn't smile, didn't call out, just watched me like she wasn't sure if she had the right to, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might turn away. But she didn't. She didn't say anything at the event, didn't make a scene. She simply disappeared as the crowd filtered out. I didn't ask around, I didn't look for her. But that afternoon, I found her, seated alone at the Terrace Cafe behind the hotel. Not the main one, the showy lobby cafe full of glass and marble. No, she was at the Little Garden Cafe, the one you had to know existed to find. The one surrounded by hedges and half-forgotten orchids. She'd remembered it, or maybe she'd just hoped I would. When I walked up, she looked up briefly. 10 minutes, she said. That's all I'm asking. I sat without speaking. She didn't waste time, didn't soften her voice or decorate her words. I wasn't well, she said. Back then. I told myself I was protecting our family name, holding the line. But really, I think I was just afraid. Afraid of what people would think if they knew how much I leaned on you. How much of me only stood because you were holding the weight. She paused. No tears, no theatrics, just truth spoken like a stone finally laid down after being carried too long. I can't fix it, she added. I know that. But I'm sorry. For what I said, for how I made you feel, for all of it. I let the moment stretch. I wasn't angry, not anymore. I'd let that go a long time ago. I was simply still. Solid in a way I hadn't been when I used to chase her approval like a dog chasing headlights. Apologies don't always fix things, I said. But I respect that you showed up, and that you didn't come here asking for anything back. She nodded. Not in defeat. In understanding. There's a difference. When we stood to leave, she lingered. Took half a step forward, shoulders tensing as if for a hug. I didn't move. I don't hate you, I said gently, but I can't build from where we broke. She stepped back, arms falling, quietly, to her sides. That's fair, she said. We didn't say goodbye. We just left. Two women who once knew how to tear each other down with silence, now choosing a different kind of quiet. The kind that didn't need winners or apologies etched in stone. That night, back in my hotel suite, I stood at the window. The Boston skyline stretched out like a circuit board made of light. One of the buildings across the river had the glowing logo of my consulting firm. My name, my work, lit in soft lines against steel and glass. No champagne, no spotlight, but it was enough. A soft ping from my laptop broke the silence. Subject: Thank you from Kara Ellis, founder, Rise Up Analytics. She'd been in the audience. I remembered her face, bright, focused, taking notes like the future depended on them. Maybe it did. Just wanted to say thank you, her email read, for making room for people like me, for showing there's more than one way to be powerful. I stared at the words for a long moment before typing. We don't wait for room, Kara, I wrote. We build it. Then I hit send. Outside, the city thrummed. People moving through subway tunnels, hotel lobbies, airport gates, rushing through doors, carrying versions of themselves they'd stitched together from heartbreak and ambition. I thought about how many times I'd been called the family failure. How many rooms I'd entered knowing someone was waiting to see me fall, but I didn't fall, because some of us aren't meant to be the crown. We're meant to be the foundation, And foundations don't demand attention. They don't beg to be loved. They carry everything else, quietly, relentlessly, and with more strength than anyone sees. Justice wasn't about vengeance. It wasn't about payback. It was this moment, being able to walk away, whole, without needing to be seen, without needing to look back.